This is a thrill for me to be sitting here with two-time Oscar winner Sally Field.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled.
Sally's here as part of our limited series, Making Change, the 100 most significant political films of all time, culled from the New Republic's list, released in the magazine last summer.
Which is an awful list. We just have to say that. Really, really bad.
You didn't have to say it first.
I had to. I have all respect for the magazine, but really, the great McGinty, I like Brian Donlevy, but it's never mind.
So you had some issues with the list in general.
There are a lot of movies that should have been on there that weren't, but that's another list. That would be my list.
Well, I would be very interested in the Sally Field 100 most significant. I'm one of the...
on the waterfront? You know? Come on.
But it's interesting what made the list and what didn't. I think, first of all, we're going to rejoin this conversation
we digress.
in a minute. No, but the digression is important. Sally has picked the film that comes in at number 81 on the list, the documentary from 1984, The Times of Harvey Milk from Rob Epstein, made 6 years after his murder.
Yeah.
What drew you to this?
Oh, my God. You know, just to use a slogan right now, we're not going back.
Yeah.
And the progress that this country has made, you know, wonderful, profound progress culturally on equal rights, human rights for the LGBTQ community is profoundly important. I wanted to pick Milk, the movie that was made in 2008.
Yeah, Gus Van Sant's film.
A magnificent film, and Sean Penn's absolutely exquisite performance, but it's not on the list. I wanted to because I'm an actor, and I wanted it to be, you know, also about acting. But this documentary is great. It won the Academy Award. It should have won the Academy Award. And it's so moving. I defy you not to cry, no matter who you are, what party you are affiliated with, because it's about human beings trying to stand up and be equal.
The doc very effectively takes you through Harvey's life, what brought him to San Francisco. I mean, he was working on Wall Street, basically, and then all of a sudden he's letting his hair grow and he moves out to San Francisco.
And he's saying who I am. This is who I am.
And it's only 90 minutes. This is not going to take up a lot of your time. And yet it tells Harvey's whole story, the movement's story, and then the story of his terrible
assassination.
Death. It gets a lot in.
I think Harvey changed a lot of things. The Stonewall Uprising in the West Village in 1969, where these gay men stood up and they wouldn't be pushed around anymore. This was a really important moment. And then Harvey, you know, came not too long after that. You know, clearly the line of influence. And then, unfortunately, AIDS started in 1981 and went on until the early 90s.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, when you think back about all the leaders that have been cut down too early, and Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, you know, both men killed in their 40s, Harvey killed in his late 40s. Harvey Milk, during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, would have been such a valuable voice. He would have been
so important.
Yeah.
The decision is to go back in their closet real good, slam the door tight, which some will do, or burst down those closet doors once and for all and stand up and start to fight.
Did you see it when it came out, or
no.
you said you saw it later?
No, I had seen Milk when it came out, but I barely remembered it for some reason, maybe because I'm 40 bazillion years old now. But I even rewatched that and reminded myself of how moving it is. And then it wasn't on the list. So I thought, oh, God, well, and then there was the doc. Okay, I'll watch the doc. I hadn't seen it. I was a little like, okay, I dare you to be as good as the Gus Van Sant
Well, let me
film.
interrupt, because I want people to understand who Sally Field is. So we offer this list to people, and she was first kind enough to say yes, she'd do it. And then you found a movie you hadn't seen, and you watched it to see. I just mean you're sort of, you have unparalleled diligence.
Well, I watched ones I had seen,
I know,
and then I realized I hated them.
Oh, my goodness. Right, you need to be impressed.
I do. It takes about 10 minutes and you're in. It's very well done. It's wonderfully done. And then Harvey Milk is he's such a diamond of a soul.
Infectious.
And he just jumps out at you. And I would follow him anywhere, but he's gone.
Yeah, it's very easy to see why the people in the film were so moved by him. I mean, again, he reminds me in the same way. There's a little bit of Martin Luther King in him. There's a little bit of Bobby Kennedy in him. There's and of course, tragically, his life ends the same way.
Yeah.
Sally, thank you. We'll talk more after the movie, but let's watch it now. Here it is from director Rob Epstein in 1984, The Times of Harvey Milk. I'm back with Sally Field to discuss the film we just saw, The Times of Harvey Milk. Comes in at number 81 on the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time, all part of our series, Making Change, as we look at a number of these films. First of all, Sally, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And thanks for picking this. The narration in this film struck me immediately, and of course, it's Harvey Firestein.
Of course, you recognize his voice. I did immediately because he was actually in Mrs. Doubtfire as well. And he's a wonderful, tremendous man. It almost made me start crying just hearing his voice. You know, you're sobbing at the end. The shot of the people that came out holding candles all down the street in San Francisco, thousands of people. And the interviewee says one of the things that struck her so tremendously is that it was silent. No one talked, no one shouted, there was no anger. They just held candles and walked down the street. And the shot just is like, you know, just you're done.
So let me ask you this, Sally. Norma Ray and Lincoln are the two that spring to mind, but you can certainly make an argument that even Places in the Heart has a political element to it.
Absence of malice.
Absence of malice, definitely. Hollywood is less inclined these days to make an overt political movie. They'll make movies about some social causes, but to make an overtly political movie, there is a hesitancy. Makes me wonder whether Norma Ray could get made now.
No.
You don't think so?
Oh.
So why the change, do you think?
Well, as you well know, the whole industry has changed so dramatically, hugely since the pandemic, because theaters just lost the ability to draw anybody in. But I watched it change when the audiences were changing. You know, it was more overseas, and the films got bigger, and they were more about catering things to very young men, 14, 15, 16. Comic book movies got to be huge. Enormous budgets that if the film goes down, the whole studio goes down. So they're not interested in making human stories.
So you think in the era when, let's take the 70s, when your film came out, when Norma Ray came out, and all those wonderful political movies, The Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor and the Conversation and All the President's Men and Network, were we better off? Were we more politically astute with movies telling political stories?
I sure think it is a way to make people think or feel. You know, you leave the audience, you know, either laughing or crying, but the most important thing would be have them leave the theater thinking about something that maybe they hadn't considered, or maybe they didn't know they were actually interested in. Live theater has continued to try to make it about that, even though they've had a hard time fighting to have serious plays have a place to land.
You know, we have the tools to be more sophisticated about politics than we've ever been. We have access to information that was inconceivable to have at our fingertips in the 1970s. Yet, I think almost everyone would agree that in many ways we are incredibly unsophisticated politically in comparison to how we were 30, 40 years ago. Not that it was perfect in any way then, but I mean, now we are in entrenched camps and instinctively interpret information.
I think social media has done a lot to aid in that, making us entrenched camps and misinforming, disinforming. And working class people are people that are just busy, and they turn that on and they take that as a fact. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, she used to believe the front page of the National Enquirer and say, "Look at this, Sally, would you look at this? Would you look at this?" I'd say, "Joy, come on, this isn't real." "Well, it's printed here. It's got to be real." How do you get them to realize, no. How do I say to my grandmother, Joy, put that rag down? I can't say it to them, you know?
And by the way, I love that your grandmother's named Joy. That's
I know,
really great. I don't have an answer for you, but I'll take this because this has been a lovely conversation. So, Sally, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Ben.
Sally's work is done for the night, but the political movies continue here on TCM. Coming up from 1964, we'll have Franklin J. Schaffner's film, The Best Man. I'll be joined by a Josh Mankiewicz.
Oh, him.
Hard to pronounce his last name, but I'm sure he'll be very entertaining. That's coming up next on TCM. All right, this is fun. This is my brother, Josh Mankiewicz from Dateline.
Yes.
Right? Oh,
Yeah.
It's Dateline, right?
On NBC.
By the way, how long have you been at Dateline? Is it 30 years?
I'm starting my 30th year, yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Everything I learned on television, I learned from my brother, both from observing him and from also just you telling me how to do it.
Right.
There was a fair amount of that, too.
Stop doing this, start doing that.
Yeah. Josh is here to talk about number 69 on the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time. This is The Best Man from 1964 with Henry Fonda and Cliff Robertson. They are the two main candidates vying for an unnamed political party's nomination for president. And you could make a case it's the Democratic Party. You could make a case it's the Republican Party in 1964.
Totally could be either one. It describes a situation that hasn't happened in modern politics and probably won't happen again, ever, during our lifetimes, which is a brokered convention, a convention in which neither of the two leading candidates has enough delegates. And the movie's about the sort of backroom deals and the infighting and the strategizing and the blackmailing and things that go on to try to get somebody the nomination. And that situation just doesn't exist. I mean, the last time there wasn't a first ballot nomination for a presidential nominating convention was a very, very long time ago.
Yeah, a lot of this film, you know, again, couldn't happen now, but it feels totally possible. There's nothing in this that jumps out as, oh, that would never be the case.
No, I mean, it's great because it's about not just what these two guys and their staffs and their wives and their supporters do. It's about a lot of other things that are still sort of current in politics. It's about the price of success, about how low will you go. At one point, Lee Tracy, who plays a former president and who got an Academy Award nomination for this.
He was in the play. It's a Gore Vidal play.
Right.
And Lee Tracy is sensational.
He's great in this.
Yeah.
He says to the Cliff Robertson character, you think the ends justify the means.
Well, son, I got news for you about both politics and life. May I say the two are exactly the same? There are no ends, Joe, only means.
And that kind of sums up politics today. I mean, it ought to be a contest of policies and ideas, but it's not. It's about opposition research and attack ads and money. The two stars of this, both, you get the feeling they would be qualified to be president. The year before, Cliff Robertson had played John F. Kennedy in PT 109.
And PT 109.
And The Best Man came out in early 1964, and in the fall, Henry Fonda played the president in Failsafe. And in 1979, in a movie that I took you to see,
Really?
he played the president in the film Meteor.
We did go to see Meteor.
We
That's
did?
right, yeah.
You still owe me $350.
Yeah, I'm going to get that to you shortly. As I said, Gore Vidal play from 1960. In Gore Vidal's mind, the basis of each of these characters can be drawn to essentially one person with parts of others drawn in. Henry Fonda is an Adlai Stevenson-like character.
Who was criticized at the time for being too reflective, too intellectual, too smart, too thoughtful.
Right, which is a big criticism from the Lee Tracy character. And Cliff Robertson is very clearly mostly Joe McCarthy.
And maybe some Richard
And there's
Nixon.
some definitely
And,
Richard Nixon in there, yeah.
Gore Vidal had this sort of love-hate relationship with the Kennedys, depending on what year and what Kennedy you're talking about.
Right, that's right.
And Bobby Kennedy, who was always sort of described by his critics as ruthless, there could be some of that in the Cliff Robertson character.
I don't think I'm giving anything away here with the Cliff Robertson character plays a senator named Joe Cantwell, and he built his name on breaking up the mob by suggesting, in this case, that they had been infiltrated by communists, which is absurd. But Bobby Kennedy's was a different sort of mob busting. I mean, that part is very clearly a little hint of Bobby Kennedy.
Right, and so is the sort of allegation of he'll do anything.
He'll do anything to.
Right. I didn't realize that it's not just called The Best Man, it's Gore Vidal's The Best Man.
Oh,
like
I missed
like
that,
Lee
yeah.
Daniels as the butler or Joseph L. Mankiewicz as Cleopatra.
Right, yeah.
There are not a lot of movies like that.
That's right, yeah.
The other thing I didn't realize is that our cousin, Tom Mankiewicz, has his first movie credit on this. He's a production associate. In his autobiography, Tom talks about how at one point they were behind filming, they were behind schedule in filming, and they wanted to cut a scene, but they required Gore Vidal's approval. So they send Tom to the Beverly Hills Hotel where Gore Vidal is lying by the pool, covered in suntan oil.
Right, yeah.
And Tom says to him, look, they want to cut this one little scene. And Gore Vidal holds up his wrist. He says, this is a Patek Philippe watch. He said, it's one of the most beautiful precision instruments in the world. He goes, now, you open up the back of that watch, you take a little thing out, right? Watch doesn't work anymore. It's like I'm wearing a turd on my wrist, right? Tom's like, I'm going to take that as a no.
Yeah,
right. He goes, goes back to the set. They didn't cut the scene.
All right, let's watch The Best Man, and we'll talk more afterwards. Maybe. Here it is from 1964, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner. Henry Fonda, Cliff Robertson, Lee Tracy, The Best Man. Back here with Josh Mankiewicz, who is, in fact, my brother, 30 years at Dateline, but before that, many years as a political reporter in New York and Los Angeles and nationally when you were with ABC.
And at ABC, I worked with Howard K. Smith, who's in this movie, who was a lovely guy. You know, it was great to see Howard K. Smith again, who was a wonderful guy, kind of shoved aside during the Roone Arledge era at ABC News.
Using those real reporters lended an air of legitimacy to it. I mean, all those, you know, first of all, there's real convention footage there, clearly.
Right. There's a lot of real convention footage. They shot a lot of it at the Ambassador Hotel, which just a couple of years later became infamous when Robert Kennedy was killed there. One of the great things the film does is the sort of backstories, which do still exist today. The deal that Henry Fonda makes with his wife to sort of, campaign with him and be calm and act like they love each other, even though at that point they clearly don't. And the sort of the other people that you have to kind of put up with in politics. One of them played beautifully by Ann Sothern, and is incredibly irritating, but they put up with her character.
Great. See, Henry Fonda always backing out of the room like,
I don't want to talk to her.
Talk to her. Yeah.
Shelley Berman, who really steals the scenes that he's in as this sort of whistleblower who has an axe to grind against the Cliff Robertson character, who's so wonderfully sort of oily and dishonest.
And not a character you expect Shelley Berman
not at all,
to
but
play.
He's great, just great at it. And those are the things I think that give the film a lot of real authenticity, even today.
My memory of the film, having not seen it in like a decade, was that Henry Fonda was orchestrated that end a little more carefully, that there had been a conversation, a phone call, at least something that they allude to, but no. Merwin, Governor John Merwin of somewhere in the
says,
West.
I'm releasing my delegates. And Kevin McCarthy's like, no, we can still win this.
Yeah, right, I'm releasing them to Governor Merwin, who presumably, I don't know, we might, at this point, could be flying back to Oregon or wherever the...
But in that moment, Cliff Robertson's character knows this is it. I'm going to lose. I lost because of what he did.
Right.
He couldn't win, but he gave his support to somebody else so that I won't win.
Right.
And then there's that great scene with the guy who never says a word.
The next president of the United States,
presumably
Governor John Merwin, ascends the escalator, played by an actor named William Ebersol, was never in another movie.
I know. And Henry Fonda's left behind in the crowd. The crowd passes him by.
Just didn't go right by him.
Literally and metaphorically.
Even though 38 seconds earlier, he was the front runner to be president.
And now he's just forgotten back there with his wife, just standing there alone. And Merwin's going up the escalator, and there's that moment where they look at each other.
Yeah. And Bosley Crowther in the New York Times in his review commended William Ebersol for his performance, his lineless escalator ascent.
It's the essence of underplaying.
Yes, it is the essence of underplaying. Oh, by the way, you mentioned that Henry Fonda, the same year, later that year, played the president in Failsafe. We both love Failsafe, and Failsafe is on the list. I think it's at number 99 in the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time. It's great if anybody hasn't seen Failsafe.
A year earlier, Fonda had played a different Secretary of State, the Secretary of State designate in Advise and Consent.
In Advise and Consent, right. Yeah. Henry Fonda was politically active, and clearly this is the kind of movie that interested him.
And that character, that's the kind of guy you want in politics.
Right. Our father, who attended more conventions than just about anyone alive, and who ran with Gary Hart, George McGovern's 1972 campaign, and worked for Bobby Kennedy as his press secretary in 1968, and then covered the 68 convention after Bobby's murder. I mean, our father was in favor of democracy, actively.
100%.
But bemoaned the loss of smoke-filled rooms where candidates were chosen. He thought there was an upside to that.
He contributed a great deal of the smoke in those smoke-filled rooms.
He did.
A lot of it came from things he had lit. So he was always pretty comfortable in a room like that, whether politics were being discussed or anything else.
Anything else, that's right. All right, Josh, this was great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, what are you doing for dinner?
Not with you.
Josh is done for the night, but the political movies continue here on TCM. As always, they are uncut and commercial-free. Secretary Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Secretary of the Smithsonian means you're the director. You run the place.
On good days, I do.
All right, good. Secretary Bunch is here as part of our series, culled from the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time. You have selected the film at number 95 on the list. 1932, Paul Muni leading the cast of I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. You remember the first time you saw the film?
First time I saw the film was with my dad, and he talked a lot about, what this film was about and what I could learn from the film. And it was the first time I realized you could learn something from watching TV.
And how much have you taken from what he told, and what are your thoughts on it, seeing it now many years later?
He told me that the criminal justice system sometimes works, but often it was corrupt and it made good people corrupt. And I've never forgotten that.
Paul Muni is the star of this film. For people who don't know, it's a 1932 movie, it's a pre-code movie. It's relevant in a couple of different ways in the film. I think it serves it better that it's 1932 and not after the code started being enforced in 1934. But Paul Muni is a guy who, as you'll see early in the film, down on his luck, World War I veteran, and gets accused and convicted of a crime that he sort of commits, and then finds himself in a chain gang down south. So this is based on a true story.
I think that's what's so powerful about it. One of the things about this movie that is so good is that it really is accurate. You really get a sense of what it was like to be on a chain gang, the fact that sort of punishment was really something they did with every day, and that the brutality really sort of was replaced by what they said discipline, but it really was brutality. And that, in essence, what I find so fascinating about this film is that it's the first film that I ever saw that really helped me understand the restrictions of the chain gang, the pain of the chain gang, and also the pain that people felt. I just thought it really captured what a chain gang was.
Forced labor that you don't pay for. It reminds me of something. I can't quite recall what that is. I mean, it really is. It's this 20th century form of continuing slavery.
Well, in some ways, what the chain gang really is, it's a means of social control. It's really created after slavery is over, and it's a way to control many of these black men who are now free. It's also a way to control people that they think are hardened criminals, the hard labor for hardened criminals. And that really what it is a system that controlled people, but it was a system that also allowed states to make a lot of money. You would rent the convicts to do work in factories, on farms, building roads, building railroads. So it really was a way to control people, but to use that labor as a free way to help states become prosperous.
I think the tendency for most people, myself included, is to think of Southern chain gangs as including almost exclusively black prisoners. And we'll see in this movie that the prisoners are segregated, and there certainly are black men on the chain gangs, but Paul Muni is white, but the brutality once you're on the chain gang is probably fairly universal.
I think that's right. I think the one difference is that most chain gangs were overwhelmingly African American. So this is really, it does show the segregation, and it does show that there were whites on the chain gang, but if you looked at the history of it, you'd see more African American presence than anybody else.
The most telling scene for me is a moment where they're woken up early in the morning, about to be taken away for the day's work, which by the clock they show us is basically a 16-hour day, right? And you come back, you go to sleep, you do it again the next day. And there is this point that I don't know would have been made in a movie made after the code started enforcing censorship on the movies. But there's just these tight shots from director Mervyn LeRoy of the despair and hopelessness of the men. And you see it in the faces of the African Americans, and you see it in the faces of the white prisoners. And that, to me, is a very clear message that in this moment, everybody is all the same.
I think that's right. In some ways, that's such a powerful scene because you see that everybody's suffering, everybody's afraid, everybody's longing for freedom, regardless whether you're black or white. I think it's one of the most powerful scenes in the movie.
Yeah, fascinating conversation, Secretary Bunch. Thanks very much, and we'll continue it after we see the movie. Here it is, from Warner Brothers in 1932, directed by Mervyn LeRoy with a cast led by Paul Muni. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. I'm back with Secretary Lonnie Bunch, who runs the Smithsonian. You've had that job since 2019, is that right?
Seems like it's been 35 years.
I'm sure that job is stress-free. I don't know what you're talking about. All right, let's talk about the end of I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. I mean, just in case some people missed it, mostly what you got there at the end is Muni saying to Helen, played by an actress named Helen Vinson, I hide in rooms all day, travel by night. No friends, no rest, no peace. I keep moving. That's all that's left of me. And then at the end, she says to him as he withdraws from her, "Can you tell me where you're going?" No answer. "Will you write?" No answer. "Do you need money?" No answer. "How will you live?"
I steal.
Oof. And that's it. And then credits.
That's the best ending of just about any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it really gives you that sense of here is a good person corrupted by a system and found himself with no other options other than to be what they thought he was, a criminal.
As far as an ending, this stamps it, right? Because this problem is not solved for him. And to the character in the movie, will never be solved.
As I'm watching the movie the first time, I thought, well, it'll work out at the end. And suddenly for us to realize that no matter what, it's going to be different and that he's going to be a criminal the rest of his life. He's going to be hiding in the shadows the rest of his life. Made an unbelievably powerful ending to
Yeah,
me.
you know, the callousness of the treatment is obviously, you know, the worst part of what these prisoners experienced. But what gets me is the callous betrayal of him. Right, when he sort of made this deal to, yeah, you'll serve 90 days and you'll get a pardon. Make it a year, we'll help you out. And then, no, right? And they knew all along
Exactly.
they were never going to do it. They didn't care.
Well, the notion that one, you could trust that
Yeah.
system.
Right, that's right.
And two, the sense that he felt, all right, this is my chance to have a clean slate, to basically come back, and when I get out after 90 days, I can marry Helen and I can have the life I want. And then suddenly to slowly realize that's not going to happen. And yet to continue to keep working and then suddenly realizing one day, no matter what, they have him forever.
Yeah. The success of the National Museum of African American History and Culture has led you now, as the head of the entire Smithsonian, to start the process of opening 2 other museums, yeah?
I vowed after I built the African American Museum, I was done. Who knew I was going to have to build 2 new museums, a museum, National Museum of the American Women's History, and a National Museum of the American Latino. And that in some ways, the great strength of the Smithsonian is that we can create different portals into what it means to be an American. You could go through the Air and Space Museum or the African American Museum to understand that. And so these new museums will just enrich our ability to help people understand the complexity of the American experience.
Is it incredibly challenging to navigate this moment, and maybe it's longer than a moment, but this moment we are in history?
I think it's important to recognize that anybody that runs cultural institutions has to figure out how do you find middle ground, how do you find allies, because the reality is there are people that say they're